So it is 10:01. Let's go ahead and get started. I know people are still signing in, but it looks like the presenters are here. So we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, there's a couple of files, and if you go to the file menu at the top of your screen and then go down to transfer, there should be two files that you can download. One is the agenda with all the websites, sorry, that is in the presentations. And then another is a file that we'll talk about later on in the meeting about the TCQ's integrated report. So those two are out there available for you. And if everybody could go ahead and type their name and affiliation in the chat box, I can use that for the sign-in sheet. Okay, so I'd like to go ahead and welcome everybody to this year's steering committee meeting. Just some housekeeping. I have muted all the attendees. If you would like to speak, go ahead and either raise your hand or chat, put your question in the chat box. If for some reason I keep ignoring that, just go ahead and unmute yourself and pop in. I'd like to keep this kind of informal, but again, we have two presenters at the beginning and I want to make sure I respect their time. So if we could hold those questions until the end of the presentations, that would be wonderful. And then again, as always, our presentation videos will be available on our TRA YouTube channel under the Technical Services and Basin Planning playlist. So yeah, thank you. I was going to do that. Thank you. Just a very quick background. So the Clean Rivers program was established in 1991 and it is administered by TCEQ that contracts with local river authorities. And our TCEQ project manager right now is Luis Medina. He may be on the call. Yes, he's on the call. And then within TRA, we're part of the Technical Services and Basin Planning Department, which covers our GIS work as well as our environmental services within the authority. So the Clean Rivers program falls under the environmental services portion, but we do other projects outside of the Clean Rivers as well. So along those lines, we have a couple of presentations by folks outside of TRA, some things that have been going on lately. First up, we're going to have the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey. The presenter for that will be Randy. Is that correct? Yeah, Randy Neprash. He is with the Municipal Stormwater Coalition. I'm sorry. And then following that, so that presentation will be covering the Clean Watershed Needs Survey. And I think this is going to be beneficial to the watershed protection plans and the regional flood planning groups that are coming up now. Following that, we're going to have a presentation about the PFAS project that's been going on. That's quickly becoming a pretty hot topic across the nation. So let's go ahead and get started. I will see if I can pass the presenter mode. I'm going to stop sharing.
This is a very strange experience. Angela, you're going to need to nod your head or something if you can hear me. Can you see my slideshow too? Excellent. Yes. Well, then I will just talk into the void for a little while. Sorry about this. This literally never happened before. Anyway, So I'm here this morning to talk briefly and quickly about the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey. I am Randy Neprash. I'm calling in from trying to call in anyway, from the Twin Cities of Minnesota. I am the vice chair of the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance. We refer to ourselves as NAMSA. I also work for Stantec Consulting, and I'm the lead on this NAMSA project that's focused on the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey that is sponsored by Stantec. Really quick intro about NAMSA. There are more than 7,500 MS4 permittees around the country, municipal separate storm sewer systems. There are state and regional level coalitions of these permittees all around the country, and NAMSA is comprised largely of those coalitions. We have member organizations in 24 of the states in the country, including Texas. So that's the short intro. The Clean Water Act, right from the get-go, required EPA to assess the capital investment needs, construction projects and such, for all Clean Water State Revolving Fund eligible projects and report their findings on those needs to Congress. EPA determines the needed projects and their associated costs by surveying clean water state revolving fund coordinators in every state in the country. This all started in 1972. The most recent version of the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey was in 2012, and there is a new clean survey that is underway right now. Why is it important? It's important on a number of levels. It shows the capital investments needs nationwide for all these types of projects. It informs funding allocations. Probably the best example right now is it's the strongest element of an allocation formula that determines how much money every state in the country gets for sewer overflow, for the sewer overflow and stormwater reuse municipal grants program, otherwise known as the OSG program, which isn't much money right now, but is going to be more money in the future. And this data is publicly available. One place where this shows up is in the ASCE Public Infrastructure Report Card, which is a big deal nationwide. Stormwater is now a category within that report card. This is the only data collection of its type in the country. These needs are captured by the survey, and then they're used by Congress and state legislatures in all manner of things, but including grant and loan planning, but also funding decisions as well. Underreporting minimizes the need for future funding into all clean water programs. And in NAMSA's view, the highest level way to view this is if stormwater needs continue to be significantly underfunded, stormwater will just never get the focus or funding that it merits from Congress. NAMSA is particularly and relentlessly focused on stormwater, but the Clean Watershed Needs Survey covers a bunch of other things as well. So here's the list. Wastewater collection and treatment facilities throughout the country, all sorts of stormwater programs, combined sewer overflow correction efforts, non-point source pollution control projects. So these would be rural ag projects, unregulated cities, but then also decentralized wastewater management, septic and such. So it's a broad range of capital projects under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund eligibility. The way it works is that coordinators in each state gather documentation from local governments and other state agencies, but regional entities such as your authority, I suspect, that describe eligible projects and their costs. The locals send the information to their state coordinators. The state coordinators then enter data and documentation into an EPA data entry portal for review. EPA then reviews all that submitted data, determines the eligible costs, and then prepares a report to Congress. This is the cover from the 2012 Clean Watershed Needs Survey report to Congress. Stormwater needs were significantly underreported in the 2012 Clean Watershed Needs Survey. There are a number of reasons for this. 16 states, including Washington, D.C., actually reported no needs whatsoever, zero for stormwater needs, which is just no longer the case anywhere in the country. 16 states reported an average of only $41 million in needs each. That's for a 20-year planning horizon. So those numbers were absurdly low. 4 states out of the entire country reported 65% of the total reported needs for the country. Texas was one of those states. California, New York, and Maryland were the other 3. Of the more than 7,500 MS4 permittees around the country, which includes virtually every large and medium-sized city in the United States, only 21% of the permittees reported any needs in the 2012 survey. So this has to improve. What projects are eligible, allowable to be considered within the survey? It's any construction project, any capital need project that is eligible for funding under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. Not funded, but eligible to be funded. The needs need to be unfunded as of January 1st, 2022. Construction has not started, or external funds had not been formally committed to the project. And then the project needs to be expected to complete construction within the 20-year survey planning horizon. What's the documentation requirement look like? The locals are asked to submit existing documentation detailing project descriptions and cost. In general, the documentation should not be created for the purpose of the survey, but in many cases, documentation does not exist, and EPA has 2 alternatives. And the meaningfulness of these will be clearer in a couple slides further on in the presentation. One is to develop a state-specific estimation approach, and the other is to use one or more of the EPA cost estimation tools that have been created for this purpose and for this survey. These are particularly useful on the stormwater side. What's a state-specific approach? It's an approach that is proposed by a state for estimating the costs of a project that are specific for that state. And that these can be used where project-specific documentation does not exist, but the state is reasonably certain that projects are needed and are probably going to be built in the next 20 years. The schedule for these is a state-specific approach needs to be submitted by May 31st of this year, but another state can adopt an already accepted state-specific approach by September 1st of this year. Here's an example, and this is why I'm covering this. This is an example of a state-specific approach that was submitted by Mississippi for the 2012 survey and was accepted by EPA. The needed projects are based on recommended load reductions in TMDLs to water bodies throughout the state. They calculated the number of BMPs that were needed in order to be able to achieve the waste load allocation and the load allocation within those TMDLs. They then gathered and substituted estimated costs for similar types of BMPs to meet similar load reductions. In this case, in Mississippi, they used costs from the Department of Agriculture for, a good example of this would be a TMDL may call for a nutrient load reduction, reduce phosphorus by X number of pounds. The state has an estimated cost of how much it costs to achieve, say, a pound of reduction in, say, rural or agricultural TMDL contexts. And then they simply multiply the unit cost times the number of pounds. They come up with an estimated cost. this may be appropriate for you folks. Some of these TMDLs can be quite large scale and the numbers are quite substantial. And so the needs and costs estimated in the survey can be quite large for many of these TMDL applications. This is the timeline for the survey. The data portal at EPA is open now and will be open until the end of February in 2023. State-specific approaches are due at the end of May, but other states can kind of sign on to another state's state-specific approach by September 1st. Then the approval for documentation is at the end of December. And then after the data portal closes, EPA will work on processing all the data, and they are aiming to deliver the report to Congress by late 2023 or early 2024. Here are some web links for additional information. The two staff people at EPA who are working on this are wonderfully cooperative and helpful. We can't recommend them more highly. So if you folks have any questions, you should definitely get in touch with Josh or Elizabeth. Here is the Clean Watershed Needs Survey webpage, and the probably the most authoritative document on what types of projects are eligible. This is actually a very useful, reasonably concise document, so I recommend it highly for what types of projects. This is the web link for the state coordinators, so you can find the name, email address, and phone number for the state coordinator in Texas. Also a link for the Clean Watershed, Clean Water State Revolving Fund coordinators throughout the country. And then I also included a link to NAMSA's YouTube channel where we have multiple videos. We did a webinar recently with EPA with much more information about the Clean Watershed Needs Survey, and that is not posted right now, but should be posted fairly soon. And with that, I am done. I will try to stop sharing. And I guess if there are any questions, they would need to be written into the chat. But I'm happy to try to answer anything. Thank you. I'm glad you could hear me. Seeing any questions in the chat? Shall we assume? I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions by email after the fact, but otherwise, I'll assume that we're done, and I will say goodbye. And okay, thanks for your attention. Sorry for the complications. Bye-bye.
Okay, so our next presentation, Eva or Kyle, or one of y'all are going to do the presentation?
First of all, just because we've had trouble, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Can everybody else?
Good.
Yep, okay.
Glad to hear that. Yeah, so I'll be giving most of that presentation. Thanks for the chat messages, Aaron and Robin. That's helpful. And Kyle, who is actually doing most of the work on this project, will jump in to steer me or correct me if I say anything wrong. He and I work well together that way. So hello, everyone. My name is Eva Steinle-Darling. My colleague Kyle Thompson is also on the line. Oh, he has his video up now. Good. We both work with Carollo Engineers in Austin, and we are working on supporting a project to sample for per and polyfluoral alkyl substances, or PFAS, on the Trinity River as part of Water Research Foundation project number 5082. So I'm going to start with some background about this and then get into the actual sampling plan and campaign towards the end of our presentation. And Angela, just to confirm, we're targeting about 10 minutes. Is that right?
Sorry, about 15 to 20 minutes, and we'll have time for questions as well.
Okay, great. Then I'll be able to take my time.
All right, perfect.
Great. So getting started, what are PFAS? I think everyone's heard of these 4 letters before, and they come with some sense of impending doom. But what are they actually? Well, they are a group of chemical substances known as per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. I'm only going to say that once. If I have to say it again, I'm going to stumble. So we just call them PFAS for short. And they are in a number of different consumer products. You see some of the photos here. Those of us who like to go hiking and wear high-tech rain gear, we're wearing Gore-Tex, which is, hey Kyle, you have your hand up. I'm going to just let you go ahead.
Sorry to jump in already. I don't see the slides.
Oh, well, that would be a good thing for you to point out. Sorry about that. I will go back to this and see if I can share. Thanks for pointing that out. And see if I can see everybody else again. I'm clearly not super practiced at WebEx, but I'm getting there. Can you see my slides now? So I'll go back. This is the presentation title. You can see my name and Kyle's there. Thank you for interrupting, Kyle. Now we have slides. So moving right on to the slide where I was starting to talk about Gore-Tex and that lady in her rain jacket. Well, that's me on rainy days. And yes, there's PFAS in that rain jacket. There's PFAS in the coatings of our fast food containers to keep the grease from soaking through the cardboard. There's PFAS in our personal care products. One of the more prominent places is nonstick coatings on our cookware. So your nonstick pan, unless it specifically says PFAS free, which I have yet to see in regular consumer products. It probably has PFAS in it. For the same reason, microwave popcorn bags, it's one of the first populations to be studied very closely in terms of measuring people's blood. It's not blood alcohol content, it's blood PFAS content. And it's extremely high for those people who eat a lot of microwave popcorn because you're heating these bags that are coated with PFAS on the inside to keep the butter from your popcorn from soaking through the bag. And that coating, there is some amount of that ends up in your popcorn that you eat. So now that you're thoroughly scared, let's talk about why. They have unique properties, right? They're stain repellent, they're flame resistant, they're nonstick, they're water resistant. They're really good at partitioning the surfaces, so that makes them good for coatings. And all of these unique properties have given them a wide range of really useful application in products across almost every type and from consumer electronics and all these different applications. And so they're just everywhere. So I think that's my next slide, right? Oh, what? Yeah. So why are we talking about these PFAS, right? Well, PFOA and PFOS, which are the two kind of original chemicals in this family of about, depends on who you ask, but about 5,000 plus different versions of this chemistry. These PFOA and PFOS have been linked to a number of different health effects. It's when you look at toxicology, it's very interesting because these compounds have effects on a number of different parts of the human health. It's not just a cancer endpoint necessarily. There's reproductive challenges. There's potential cardiovascular impacts. We haven't seen this broad spectrum of susceptibility until, frankly, we started hearing about COVID and all the things that it can do. So, maybe that's scary actor number 1 right now, but I would say scary actor number 2 is probably PFAS. We have some more interesting recent findings is that it actually, if you have high PFAS concentrations, it decreases vaccine effectiveness. We don't know why exactly, but it's one more thing that we care about. And why is this a big deal? Well, not only do they have a multitude of potential health impacts, but they are everywhere. So just to point out the extremes that some people have gone to, PFAS have been detected atop Mount Everest and at the North Pole. So you can look at their citations for both of those. One of the earliest studies in the early 2000s measured PFAS in the blood of polar bears in the Canadian Arctic. So, you know, they really just, they're everywhere, which, you know, okay, so now that's a problem, right? Now we need to understand it in a little more granularity as far as what can we do within the water context that we're talking today. So EPA did look at PFAS in drinking water nationwide between 2013 and 2015. That sampling campaign was called UCMR3, or Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule number 3, and it found PFOS and PFOA in some pockets across the nation, including a couple of places in Texas. I think there's an animation for that. So that, you know, overall reasonably good news at the time. The challenge with those data sets is that, you know, the technology for measuring PFAS has improved a lot over the last 10 years, so we can measure down to much lower concentrations. And note, if you're not familiar with this particular contaminant class, we're talking about nanograms per liter, so parts per trillion. These compounds have potential health effects at these really low levels, and we're seeing regulatory limits in different states, not in Texas, but in other states that are in the, you know, in this tens of nanograms per liter. Right, so this is a challenge, and so we can detect lower amounts now, and you know, so we will be looking at this again under UCMR 5, which is going to run from 2023 to 2025. A few interesting things about this new UCMR 5 rule is not only is it going to require sampling for a new list of PFAS, 29 of them versus only the 2 that we looked at a decade ago. But they're also requiring public water systems that serve down to 3,300 people to do this sampling, rather than the previous UCMR really only applied to public water systems that serve more than 10,000 people. So that's a big change for those mid-sized utilities as well. And so because of these new detection capabilities, the fact that we're being required to sample for more of the compounds than just those original 2, we're likely to see a lot more detections coming out of UCMR 5. There's that last bullet. So we do have some options if you find that you do have PFAS, but the options are frankly not great. We can put in granular activated carbon. This is a pilot system, but of course in full scale you'd have either pressure vessels, or you could even do open filters with a GAC media. Ion exchange, which is similar. Again, here this is a pilot setup, but you would usually do pressure vessels for those because you need a lot less media. That's, you know, those are options. And then, you know, the big hammer is to put in a reverse osmosis system. Those are extremely effective. Probably, if you're just looking at removal effectiveness, RO is your best option, but it comes with a couple of really significant downsides, including, you know, a portion of the water that's separated out, that you now have a liquid waste stream that has PFAS concentrated in it amongst whatever else is in the water that you have to then dispose of. So none of these options are really great. So what we're really trying to do within the context of the study, and I'll talk about this later, is work on source identification. So stopping it from entering our water systems in the first place. Where do these come from? How do we address them on the upstream end so we don't have to put in really expensive treatment on the downstream end within our water systems? So major PFAS sources include, industrial contamination, like many other places. This applies mainly to groundwater, but also to surface waters. Military fire training areas and airports. So one of the biggest sources of concentrated PFAS contaminations is from what we call AFFFs, or firefighting foam, used specifically for fighting aviation fires. Hence the military sites. These are Air Force bases or places where we have air traffic and training, as well as airports that have fire training facilities. We do know that wastewater treatment plants also have small amounts of PFAS in their treated water, even if they don't have industrial contributions. This is just from all of those consumer products that we have, even our own shedding. There's going to be PFAS in that at very, very low concentrations, but there are things we can measure. We talk about this being a kind of a pass-through thing. So part of the importance of this project is to show that this is not really, it's not the wastewater utilities producing these PFAS. They're kind of a pass-through contaminant that's coming from upstream sources. So how do we address that? And then generally recognizing it's more cost effective to remove PFAS at the source instead of at the drinking water or the wastewater facilities. And so this diagram on the right, it's a nice little cartoon that shows, what the prevalence of these sources is versus where the concentrations are. And we have precipitation everywhere. There is frankly measurable amounts of PFAS in precipitation because it picks up atmospheric dust as it falls, and there are PFAS molecules attached to that atmospheric dust. We do have a number of wastewater treatment plants, of course, with relatively low concentrations, like I said, landfill leachate, industries, airports, military training areas. That's where we get really high numbers, but of course there are fewer of those. And Kyle, do you want to jump in and just tell me where this graph came from to give us the numbers on those, relative numbers on those, on that diagram?
Sure. So I actually drew this diagram as part of the proposal for this project. But as far as where the numbers came from, so the number of wastewater treatment plants, I just, that's, rounded based on, speaking of Clean Water Needs Survey, so that's, rounded based on Clean Water Needs Survey 2012. The number of landfills that comes from a EPA database that was originally EPA project, kind of similar to the Clean Water Needs Survey, but it was focused on assessing, basically surveying landfills about their methane capture. And then PFAS using industries. So that one may be a bit of, that's probably the least precise of these numbers, because that's basically including any industry that's in a category of industry, for example, electroplating or semiconductors, a type of industry that's known to use PFAS, though not every single electroplating site is going to use PFAS. Airports, so that's based on a FAA list. So the largest 500 or so airports are actually required by the Federal Aviation Authority to practice with the PFAS containing firefighting foam even still. And my understanding is that, while the most, PFOS and PFA have been phased out for the most part, there's like an exception for that firefighting foam because they're yet to persuade the military and the FAA that the alternative formulations are sufficient for putting out those jet fuel fires. But then if there's smaller airports that might also be using that firefighting foam, we don't know, or I don't know. And then so the military fire training areas, so that's based on a Department of Defense public database of military sites that have been known to have practiced with firefighting foam. And then the 16 PFAS producing industries, that was based off, so I cited that based off, there's a pretty popular peer-reviewed study, Who et al. 2016 in ES&T letters, but that was in turn based on the EPA's voluntary phase-out program for PFOS and PFOA, so the 16 sites from the industries like 3M and DuPont that voluntarily ceased using PFOA and PFOS. There's a list of the sites from those companies on an EPA webpage.
Awesome, thanks, Kyle. I knew it looked familiar. I just didn't remember where all those numbers came from. It sounds like that was a lot of homework. Awesome. All right, so coming to this project now, the official title here is on the top of the slide, Investigation of Alternative Management Strategies to Prevent PFAS from Entering Drinking Water Supplies and Wastewater. So I'm the principal investigator for this Research Foundation project. And just a very quick overview, WRF, or Water Research Foundation, as we know them affectionately as WRF, is a nonprofit research agency funded by utility subscribers, including some of the utilities represented on this call. And of course, Corolla is leading it, and we're the largest water-only engineering consulting firm in the US. So water is our focus, our business, and our passion, including when it gets contaminated with PFAS. But I also want to acknowledge the major partners who are providing co-principal investigators to this project, including the Southern Nevada Water Authority, Arizona State University, that you'll hear about a little bit more in a minute, as well as the Hampton Roads Sanitation District, that's in Virginia, Purdue University and CDM Smith as a major partner as well. And so what are we trying to do with this 5082 project? They always have 4-digit numbers. Well, the overall goal is to provide utilities with practical, implementable, and cost-effective guidance, specifically on PFAS source evaluation and mitigation strategies. So we're really not focusing a whole lot on treatment. We're focused on trying to address this upstream question. Right, and so the approach here in very general terms is to gather utility data and experience. We have a survey that if you will reach out to us and you'd be interested in participating in our survey, we'd love to include you in that. Trying to gather, you know, because things are moving so quickly in this field, individual utilities have innovated. They're, you know, innovators at every utility, and we want to leverage that as best we can, gathering the approaches that different utilities have taken to addressing their PFAS sources and gathering that in one place as part of the guidance. So that's these 10 case studies. And this applies to wastewater utilities, drinking water utilities, and you know, and within the drinking water utilities, those that treat surface water and those that treat groundwater. And then we're strategically filling data gaps, and what we'll talk about that the Trinity is part of that is looking at trying to fill some data gaps as part of task 2, looking at surface water specifically. We have a number of other tasks that I won't talk about, trying to understand more about PFAS sources to wastewater and PFAS sources to groundwater. And then this last step is really to bring all of that back together in a guidance development that really we're trying to make it practical and implementable. So the goal is to be accessible. We're going to end up with a great big foundation report that we really don't expect most people to read. So part of our goal for this study is to also have some kind of standalone take homes that, you know, fact sheets or decision support flow charts that will help utilities make decisions without having to wade through all the details. So as part of the project, we are sampling for PFAS in the Trinity River. The general locations of those samples, we're trying to not be too specific of where they are because, you know, we're trying to be cognizant of that until we have all of the data gathered. But generally speaking, the locations are shown on this map. We've sampled at those 10 locations on 3 consecutive days in January. And we plan to do a second sample campaign soon. So with that in mind, I do want to acknowledge that this particular task is supported by several partners. So TRA in particular is supporting us through this work, and they're doing all the sample collection, which is non-trivial, right? Requires putting in boats to collect samples in midstream. You can see on the previous slide there, that's a big distance we're covering with these sample sites. So there's 2 teams actually doing this sampling. We really appreciate their support. The PFAS quantification, so that once we've collected those samples, they are going to the Southern Nevada Water Authority, which has really a world-renowned analytical lab. And we're doing the analysis at their research and development lab, and they really have some of the best capabilities still within the utility sphere, certainly for PFAS analysis. All of those data are then being fed to the team at Arizona State University, led by Municipal Islam, who's a student of Professor Paul Westerhoff's, and they are doing some GIS modeling of PFAS in the river system. And I'll get to that in a little more detail in a minute. And of course, we at Corolla are really just coordinating and leading the various tasks. We're not analyzing the data, although we'll be looking at it with the folks from SNWA as well as ASU as they come in. So what we're going to do with these data is it's actually, the Trinity is going to serve as a validation data set for a nationwide model that the team at Arizona State University is putting together to model PFAS sources in surface water, both from de facto reuse, so that's, you know, the effluent contributions, the return flows that we see in our surface waters. Like I said, they have low concentrations, but pretty consistent low concentrations of PFAS in them in the absence of industrial dischargers to the collection systems, but also some potential industrial point sources. And so This data set is going to be used to help validate this nationwide model to help us understand the relative impact at a nationwide scale of the concentrations we see in wastewater versus the concentrations that may be contributed from other industrial contributors to surface waters. And you can see at the bottom of the screen, this map that I'm showing you right now is it was produced as part of the drinks model, which I'm not going to figure out exactly what the acronym stands for, but it basically models, it was a data set that modeled how much of the water in every major surface water system in the country is actually contributed by effluent, by return flows. And so this Rice and Westerhoff paper was the first time that model was published and showed, in Texas, but actually in a lot of different places, we have river systems that on an average basis even have greater than 15% de facto reuse, which is 15% of effluent origin water in their system at any given time. And I think everyone on the Trinity River is aware that, we're very dependent on the return flows from the Metroplex to have flows in the river, and that those are an important part of the water supply. So that's a good thing, right? We want those return flows, but at the same time, we have to acknowledge that there is a certain impact there that we need to understand. So this work then, kind of zooming back out to the project level, is going to inform this guidance manual for identifying and mitigating the PFAS sources to all of our water sources. So this diagram is, again, from our proposal, is really just trying to say we have wastewater sources to wastewater that we want to manage upstream of those wastewater facilities. We have sources to surface water that include the effluent, but of course others as well. We have a lot of sources potentially to groundwater that we haven't talked much about today. And of course, we also have, ultimately, there are some treatment aspects to this that we'll be addressing before that water ultimately gets to our drinking water customers. So this diagram just kind of shows all the interconnectedness, both of our water systems and of the sources of PFAS that we have. And we're really also going to be focusing on, don't have this here, on tasks that are associated with communication and trying to do outreach to some of your potential for wastewater utilities, industrial dischargers, to understand and help mitigate them at the source, and also your consumers to say, a lot of the PFAS that we have in circulation is really from consumer products, and so the best way to put pressure on the producers of those consumer products is for people to understand their choices as consumers and try and choose products that don't contain those chemicals. So with that, kind of next steps for those of you who are interested in following this project. Like I said, we've collected one set of samples on the Trinity. We haven't had a chance to really analyze those, so we're not presenting the data today. But we'll be collecting those again in late summer or early fall this year, second set, to really compare and really validate that model. We're going to map the data, analyze and compare the model percentages of de facto reuse, plus any identified point sources, to kind of really get this as a case study for the Trinity system, but also as a validation set, like I said, for the national model. And the report and the guidance manual will be drafted by the end of 2022. So we have our internal project deadlines at the end of October, and it'll probably be published in early 2023. So with that, I'll put up a last slide here that's basically the cover slide plus my contact information. Happy to work through Angela as well if you have any questions about what we're doing, why we're doing it. And hopefully this was helpful and informative for the group. Glad to take any questions now as well.
Thank you very much. That was great. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. As a side note, just earlier this week, I found an article on Science Alert. Apparently, bloodletting is now a solution for reducing your PFAS blood concentration. Have you seen that?
Yeah, so I thought it was specifically related to blood plasma, right? So if you donate blood
Yes.
plasma, your body will regenerate more without having more input of PFAS. So yes, you can lower your blood PFAS concentrations by donating blood.
Yes, it was a research study on 285 firefighters in Victoria, Australia.
Yeah, one of my favorites is still if you use Teflon-based floss, dental floss, you have a statistically significant higher PFAS blood concentration than those people who do not floss regularly, which sometimes it makes me feel a little bit better about getting the talking to at the dentist about flossing more.
All right. Does the
Kyle, do you
committee
have any?
have any questions?
Yeah, no, nothing to add, but just yeah, kind of along those lines. You mentioned the popcorn banks, so they've shown college-age males have higher PFAS in their blood than college-age females, and they've attributed that to the higher popcorn and fast food consumption.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'll have to pass that on to my husband. He consumes popcorn quite regularly.
Well, and I struggle with and this is a little off the cuff. I can only say what I do. I struggle with the balance. I mean, it is nearly impossible as a regular consumer to avoid all things PFAS. So I think it's a question of, a progressive choices we can make as consumers. And as awareness increases, those products hopefully will begin to be phased out as well. So, you can't avoid it. You can't avoid everything. You can't, we all have to live our lives to some extent, but the question is, can we make good informed decisions about certain things versus others? There's a whole concept that we're going to explore as part of the guidance for this document called the essential use principle. So in applications where the use of Teflon, for example, is incredibly important, think medical implants or medical applications where the material properties that you get from this chemistry is just superior to anything else that we can do in those applications. Maybe that's a good reason to use that, but maybe we don't need it in our cosmetics. Maybe we don't need it in our, maybe we can live with slightly soggy or fast food containers. Those are the sorts of trade-offs that I think hopefully we'll be able to start making now that we understand the implications a little better.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
Yeah, I can't see that right now because I'm sharing, so.
Right. So Echo with the City of Plano says, great project, very informative presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Stop sharing, and that way I'll be able to see the chat.
Well, if anybody does have any questions later on, please feel free to contact me. I can pass on any questions or through Ava and Kyle themselves. So Heather will be giving a update on the Joe Pool Lake Watershed Protection Plant and the Village Creek Lake Arlington implementation plans. I believe she was on another meeting and she's coming over. So actually, while we're waiting for her, I can jump to the very next topic real quick. We have got our 2022 Basin Highlights Report available on our website right now. That link is in the handout. So that is available for review and comment. It's been posted up for a while. I think I also included the link in the final invitation for this meeting. So if you have any comments, if you could get those to me by May 6th, I believe that's 2 weeks from now, I would appreciate it. So this report format is a watershed characterization report, and it's basically just a concise discussion about each watershed. And instead of picking certain watersheds or certain segments for this report, what I've done is I've covered all of the segments that had fish consumption and recreation use impairments or concerns. So it'll be focused just on those two impairments. The next watershed characterization report will be in 2024, and I will cover all the remaining aquatic life use and general use impairments and concerns. The 2022 integrated report, TCQ's water quality assessment, that will be discussed in next year's Basin Highlights report, which will be a standard format. It's essentially a mini Basin summary report. So I'll be discussing the 22 integrated report there. It should be finalized by then. And I think that is all that I have to say about that. Let's see, is Heather on yet?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, all right, we'll back up one slide. I just jumped a slide while I was waiting on you. Are you presenting from your computer then?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing and let's see, give you presenter. There you go.
Good?
Good, looks good. Mhm.
Okay, sweet. So I'm gonna provide an update on the Joe Pool Lake Watershed Protection Plan and our Village Creek Lake Arlington Watershed Protection Plan implementation status. So for Joe Pool Lake, our funding source is provided through the TCQ, through the Clean Water Act, with local match funding from Trinity River Authority and cities of Cedar Hill, Grand Prairie, Mansfield, and Midlothian. The impetus for this project stemmed from the 2014 Texas Integrated Report that listed Walnut Creek as impaired for E. coli and the Mountain Creek arm of Joe Pool Lake as a concern for nitrate. So Walnut Creek had exceeded the 126 most probable number at 195.6 most probable number, and the Mountain Creek had exceeded the nitrate screening level of 0.37 milligrams per liter at 0.74 milligrams per liter. So the goals of this project include protecting water quality in Joe Pool Lake and the tributaries, as well as improving water quality by addressing the nitrate concern in the lake and the bacteria impairment in Walnut Creek. But as of 2020, both Walnut Creek was delisted and Mountain Creek was removed as a concern. So the Joe Pool Lake timeline was split into two phases. We had phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was completed in 2020 and phase 2 is almost complete. So we are really right in here in 2022. So the draft watershed protection plan was submitted to TCQ in December 2021. We received our first round of comments back from TCQ, and it is now in its second review period with their upper management, their leadership. So we should receive those comments back either by the end of this week or beginning of next week. And once that happens, we'll finalize that and send it off to EPA. So we're hoping to start implementation in 2023. For a review of what we did with Joe Pool Lake, we assessed 14 sites for routine and 6 sites for high flow throughout the watershed. And what came out for our select and our LDC lookout, we found that the overall impacts appeared to be most prevalent in those smaller sub-watersheds surrounding the lake, and that those areas were comprised of more urban, with the predominant E. coli loading attributed to pet waste. And then the western sub-watersheds of Walnut Creek had high loadings from deer and livestock, and the values of the high loading were well below the 126 most probable number acre per day. So it did not have a large contribution to the total loading. Septic systems, they also supplied high to moderate loads in the southern region down in here, and wastewater treatment facilities contributed to the overall E. coli loading only in the regions where they were located. So for a detailed report, you can go on to our website and all those links are embedded. So for phase 1, our watershed characterization was completed. The report was completed in February 2021, and you can find our analysis of historical data, the data collection, and the final report online. And for phase 2, you can find all of our meetings and public participation for stakeholders online, as well as our final modeling and data analysis report and the draft of our watershed protection plan. So for upcoming workshops, we have 2 that are going to be held. We have one that's going to be on May 6th, and this is going to be sponsored by the Texas A&M AgriLife Dallas County Extension and Tarrant County Extension. And they're going to be discussing feral hogs and urban wildlife. It'll be at the City of Grand Prairie Main Library. There is a fee associated with it, but there's a discount if you are a master naturalist. June 30th, we'll be having a Healthy Lawns and Healthy Waters workshop in Mansfield, and more information will be coming out regarding that. So with Village Creek, Lake Arlington, this is going to be a refresher on the Watershed Protection Plan and then what our implementation project is. So the EPA approved the Watershed Protection Plan in 2019, so it has been open for implementation projects since then. Lake Arlington borders Fort Worth on the west side and Arlington on the east side. It provides drinking water and recreation. It's rapidly developing and is listed for nutrient concerns for nitrate and chlorophyll A. And there are multiple municipalities and local authorities that were involved in the development of this Watershed Protection Plan. Village Creek is impaired for E. coli, and I think that's it on that slide. So the one outcome of the Watershed Protection Plan, one concern that was identified was illegal dumping and litter accumulation. So this top left photo is floatable litter accumulation in Lake Arlington. The top right photo is illegal dumping activity on Village Creek. And the bottom photo is significant refuse accumulation under bridges, and this was due to homeless occupation. So to support this effort of addressing the problem, the stakeholders identified best management practices, and one best management practice consisted of expanding the litter cleanup events throughout the watershed. Additionally, the stakeholders expressed interest in continued development of the illegal dumping refuse accumulation survey that our division at Trinity River Authority developed. And there is a link to this that will show the survey from 2018. So we will be building on this as we go forward with our new implementation project. So with the support of Tarrant Regional Water District, Upspire, who is a subsidiary of the Presbyterian Night Shelter, University of Texas at Arlington, Office of Sustainability, and the City of Fort Worth, we applied for a litter abatement grant through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation 5-Star and Urban Waters Restoration Program. So this includes plans to purchase, install, and maintain multiple trash barriers that you can see here in the photo at highly visible and heavily littered locations within the VCLA watershed, as well as within City of Fort Worth parks. So this program is going to aid in the expansion of the Upspire Waterways Litter Prevention Program, and we're hoping to increase community engagement and restore a certain number of acres in the VCLA watershed and a certain number of acres within the City of Fort Worth. So we're hoping, so based on 10 sites that we've identified, so installing 10 of these litter booms, we're hoping to collect up to 1,300 pounds of trash from overall per month. So we're going to see if we meet that goal. And this grant was awarded in the fall of 2021. And we have received word that we should start install the week of May 16th. So we're hoping to get some educational signs out sometime this summer or later this fall and join the North Texas Council of Governments with their cleanup initiatives, with all of their challenges. So where our proposed sites, we have one over here right at a little upstream of the mouth of Lake Arlington at Kennedale Parkway on Village Creek. And then we're going to be looking to install at Prairie Creek at 820, Wildcat Branch. We have 3 proposed locations on Eastland Creek, and once the Water Goat team gets out here, we'll figure out which site we're going to use. We're also going to be installing at one of the outfalls at Eugene McRae Park where it dumps into the lake itself. We're looking to install at Cobb Park, Echo Lake, Krause Baker Park, Big Fossil Creek at Broadway up here, and then Marine Creek at the Stockyards. And that's it. Y'all have any questions? Frozen.
I am not seeing any hands raised. Nothing in the chat.
All
All
right.
right, if you want to just stick around just for a few minutes in case somebody has a question popping up in the chat.
Yeah, sure will.
All right, so I guess we'll just go ahead and move on. Let me share my screen again. Screen 2. Okay, so this next little bit, I'm going to run through this really quickly. One of the handouts that I've provided is this Excel document, and that's pretty much what we're going to cover real quick. This is the integrated report, the draft integrated report that TCQ has provided. We've got a definition tab here. We've got the full draft report. So this has got everything for every single parameter, every single assessment unit that was assessed. Then what I've done is I've summarized that down. So if anything in that use for that assessment unit had a fully support or a no concern, it was color coded here. If there was just a concern for any particular parameter. So this basically boils everything down to like one block of data. And then I've used that data to prepare these graphs, which I'll go over here in just a minute. So I'm going to go through it very quickly. Y'all can digest this on your own. If you have any questions, just let me know. So is the presentation showing back up on the screen now? My chat disappeared.
It is, Angie.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. So next, so this is the 22 draft integrated report. It covers a period of record from 2013 to 2020. They did go back, so that's 7 years. They did go back another 3 years where they needed to obtain the data set, the required amount of data points that they needed for assessment. You can, like I said, I just showed the handout here that I'm noting here. And then also if you want to see the full report for the entire state or any of the other supporting documents that go along with it, you can do that on TCQ's website. Again, I believe I put all of this in the handout with the agenda and the website list. So just here's a quick overview of where these watersheds live in our basin. Basically what I've done is I've just grouped all the segments in these sub-watersheds in the following graphs or maps. So, so we have some issues with dissolved oxygen, macrobenthics, chlorophyll, nutrients, E. coli, PCBs in the Clear Fork. We've got dissolved oxygen, TDS chloride, algal growth nutrients, E. coli and PCBs in the West Fork. Then we've got dissolved oxygen, pH nutrients, and E. coli in the Elm Fork. DO nutrients and E. coli in the East Fork. Let's see, dissolved oxygen, habitat fish and macrobenthic communities, E. coli, E. coli. And then we've got algal growth and nutrients and PCBs all in the main stem. E. coli in Village Creek, E. coli in Mountain Creek, dissolved oxygen, sulfate, nitrate, and E. coli in Richland Chambers. Then we've got dissolved oxygen, pH, nutrients, E. coli, and Cedar Creek. Dissolved oxygen, chlorophyll, and nutrients, bacteria, and PCBs, all in the lower Trinity. So again, I think I mentioned in previous presentations, the dissolved dioxins and PCBs, that's all handled through the Texas Department of State Health Services. They do all that monitoring. So that's done through their fish tissue studies. So again, I know I went through that very quickly. If you digest the handout and you still have questions, just please let me know. And now we are on to Webb. I know everybody hates a meeting that runs really quickly and runs short. So Webb, you are free to take as long as you want with this one.
Okay, that sums it up. Thank you. So I'm going to give just an overview of a candidate conservation agreement with assurances that TRA is working on with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have some partners involved as well. It's Tarrant Regional Water District, the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth, as well as North Texas Municipal Water District. And what we're doing is we're coming together to put together a plan to address the upcoming suspected listing for a couple of species of mussels, 4 species of mussels, and 2 species of turtle. And so the species of turtle, the 2 species of turtles that we're concerned about are the western chicken turtle and the alligator snapping turtle. We also are looking at the mussels. The most pressing mussel that's on a little bit of a speedy timeline for us is the Texas fawnsfoot. One that's on a little bit longer timeline is the Texas heel splitter. And then we're also looking at the Louisiana pigtoe, which is not expected to be in our basin, but at one point it was here. So if they find it again, it's going to be covered, as well as the Trinity pigtoe. The Trinity pigtoe is probably a pretty healthy population, but it's endemic to the Trinity River Basin. So we assume it's going to be listed at some point in the future, probably 10 years from now or so. So what is a CCAA? A CCAA, what it does is it makes an agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service that you can continue your operations so long as you provide a net conservation benefit for the species. So unlike federal agencies, we can get assurances. Federal agencies cannot. So the Corps of Engineers can enter into a CCA without the second A with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but non-federal entities can get some assurances. So what that means is we agree to do certain things before the species is listed, and Fish and Wildlife will issue us an incidental take permit for that. So they'll say your operations will take approximately X amount of these species a year, and then so long as you don't exceed that, you can continue your operations, so long as you do these other things to provide them a net conservation benefit. Now, a little bit of confusion that happens here is the CCAA is under the Section 10 permitting process, which means there's not a federal nexus. So if you have a project that does not have a federal nexus could be something like a 404 consultation with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, a federally funded program. Anything with federal dollars or a federal nexus goes under Section 7. The CCAA is under Section 10. So if you have a project that requires no other federal contact, this permit will cover our operations under Section 10 for this. So how does this help the Section 7 process, which is what most of us deal with when we work in rivers, is when you try to get a project approved through Section 7, the Corps of Engineers has a consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So what we're hoping to do is have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agree that they won't recommend, so long as what we're requesting through the Corps of Engineers doesn't provide any more damage to the potential damage to the species than what's already covered in the CCAA, that Fish and Wildlife won't require additional measures for our operations. So what is the process for the CCAA? What you do essentially is it's a big, thick document, but at the end of the day, what it does is it identifies the threats to the species. It identifies your operations that could have potential impacts to the species. You identify some conservation measures that you can put together or enact proactively before the species is listed that will provide a, quote, net conservation benefit to the species. It also guarantees what your regulatory assurances are. and it becomes the basis for your incidental take permit once a species is listed. So the CCAA you must have in place and everyone signed on before a species is listed. Once it's listed, that project turns into your incidental take permit under Section 10. So our timeline, we've been working on this with Fish and Wildlife Service about a year. We probably have a draft about 75% complete that's working its way through the Fish and Wildlife right now, and some iterative comments back and forth. We have to have this in place before the Texas Fawns Foot is listed, which should be somewhere in the October timeframe, or sorry, the August timeframe. We're frankly not sure that that's going to happen in time because Fish and Wildlife has a lot of hoops they have to jump through. This all has to go publish in the Federal Register. You have to have time for public comments, et cetera, et cetera. Our hope is that we can get this done. If it does not get done, we will switch this over to a habitat conservation plan. A habitat conservation plan is for listed species. So, and it's quite a bit more detailed than a CCAA, but we're hoping that the work we've done for the CCAA will transfer to the HCP and we'll be about 75% there. So hopefully about another year to get the HCP complete if we miss the timeline. Again, our hope is we make the timeline, the CCAA gets approved, and we can all continue our operations with some conservation measures, but we're not sure that that's going to happen. So that was kind of a quick and dirty on what we're doing with the CCAAs, and I'll be happy to take any questions. But since everybody's muted, I assume there aren't any, but I will stick around in case there are some. Thank you, Angela.
All right, thank you very much, Webb. All right, so that's pretty much it that we've got for everybody this year. So does anybody have any questions or anything they want to talk about? I don't know, Webb, does the chicken turtle taste like chicken?
I can't say. I'll tell you, yes, it does. It tastes just like chicken.
Actually, I've heard that since everything is descended from a dinosaur, that actually chicken tastes like dinosaur. All right. So, well, like I said, I know how everybody really, really hates a meeting that gets done early. So, you know, we can stay here all day. But otherwise, I know several of y'all are going to be on for the coordinated monitoring meeting at 1. I am going to just leave this WebEx running. So y'all are free to either leave it running on your end or logging off and logging back on at 1. But yes, we'll kick that off at 1 o'clock. And if there's no questions, I thank everybody for coming today. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know and I'll get everything passed on to the proper person that can answer it. All right. Awesome. Thank you guys. Bye.